All right, well, unless we're expecting anybody else, I guess we could get started.
Yeah.
Everybody fine with that?
Yeah, looks like we got a corner.
Okay.
It's okay.
So we've already got a roll call. We're just missing Karen and Raul. Everyone else is present?
Mm-hmm.
Any public comment from our photographer? Apparently not. Hello? Did you have any comment to add?
No.
Good. Okay, thank you. Everybody want to look at the minutes for a moment? So just look at that.
Did
Over
you
here?
this packet? Did you just receive the packet?
Yeah.
I didn't see them in the.
So maybe they didn't have them because of the admin?
We did have the minutes.
Yeah, I'm just looking
I
on-
did review them.
I didn't see
Okay.
them in the.
Did you review these, or were you talking about
Yeah.
certain
Yeah.
accounts? They're not in the packet, the master packet that you need to have.
She did have the minutes in there.
Okay, so I'm just flipping through to see.
You know what?
I was worth skipping the other day because.
I will get the minutes, so just postpone that item. And if
Okay.
I can find them, then I'll print them and we can come
All
back
right,
to that.
so we'll come back to that in a moment, see if we can figure this out. And it doesn't look like there's any old business, anyone? Okay. Cranking right along here, isn't this working out great for Tyler? Okay, so we've got new business.
Can I just ask if it's possible, I'm not sure if the agenda is in order of maybe importance, but if
Oh.
there's anything that we could potentially move up, because I have about 15 minutes and I gotta run, unfortunately.
Okay, why don't you look through and see if there's anything you really want to,
Just, is there anything on there you'd like us to bump up?
I would love to discuss everything.
You have to
The
pick. Tom.
inclusionary in lieu,
yeah, and just a quick little, subtext to that, we're not making policy decisions at this time, but we're discussing what could come up and what's important to the committee.
yeah, that was the one that was, of most interest.
Which one was that?
It
Just-
was
The in-lieu,
the other.
number 2,
Okay.
Okay.
and the,
Sorry, we don't have minutes, apparently.
in workforce
Right, Darby?
2,
Correct.
They just weren't done? Okay.
discussion on workforce 2, which is,
It's part of the
Six.
pipeline.
yes.
No, that's also part of the inclusionary, sorry.
Oh, yes, you're right. Is it?
Yeah.
Yes, you're
Okay,
right.
so can we start from the top since we'll get to it
Yeah,
within
yep.
your time?
No, that works.
Cool.
All right, H2A Housing. I wasn't terribly sure what the committee wanted in terms of an update, so I kind of threw the kitchen sink in there. This is a term that is thrown around in a lot of different venues and never very well defined. So there are basically two types of employer-sponsored housing, or farm worker housing. There is the farm worker housing that we're all familiar with when we think of a bracero camp, which is migrant farm worker housing. Most recent two examples are Spreckles Crossing and the Nunes Project, Baranda Villas. What's interesting about at least the Spreckles Crossing project that I can think of off the top of my head is it has a use permit that actually limits its occupancy to only 8 months a year. The other part of farm worker housing is the non-migratory part. And 2 years ago when the farm worker housing study came out, they estimated that only about 4,600 migrant farm workers actually go through the area annually. There are a lot more seasonal workers who live here year-round that are not going to necessarily be covered by what everybody thinks of when they call H2A housing. H2A housing, H2A is a visa type that allows you to import workers when you can't find the domestic workers already. The challenge with it is before you can apply for the visas, you have to demonstrate to the feds that you have attempted to fill your need with domestic labor. Now, one of the things that I've heard anecdotally, at least with Spreckles Crossing, is Tanimura and Anil found they had a lot more people willing to come up and work the season from Yuma, so they didn't need as many H2A visas, even though that was the original intent of the housing product.
And when folks are coming from Yuma, they are.
They're coming seasonally,
They have visas already?
or they are.
Or they're citizens?
They're citizens, they're permanent resident aliens, they already have permission to work in the country, so you do not need the visa.
So these 4,600, did you say just come for the season, that's mostly Yuma?
No, that's what,
That's what we need for the.
that's what the
Oh, I see.
approximate H2A demand is.
Okay.
Okay, so, the study found, I think that was only about 20% of the seasonal workforce. So there is a huge percentage of the seasonal workforce that just lives here year round. It's probably closer to 12 or 13,000 people as opposed to 4,000. So when we start to talk about policy for them, it's we really need to think about what we're trying to accomplish with it. The other thing that's in there is employer-sponsored housing, which is what most of this falls under, is not something that runs through our office. There are actually 3 regulatory agencies in the county that oversee this. The county has responsibility for employer-sponsored housing in the unincorporated areas, and that would include Big Sur, where we do have some units. The city of Gonzales also took it on its own authority. And then the State Department of Housing and Community Development is responsible everywhere else. And that means annual inspections and permitting by one of those 3 agencies, depending on where the units are located. When someone walks into the planning department and wants to build just employer-sponsored housing or farm worker housing, it is exempt from the county's inclusionary ordinance, so it never even gets referred to us. I only find out about this stuff after the fact, or if I have a specific need to go find out about it. All right. Any questions?
So what are you saying about the H2A program?
I'm not saying anything about it. I'm just saying that based on the information that I have seen, the seasonal workers who come in on the H2A visa are only about 20% of the total seasonal need. There's still a need for that housing. Something like the Asonio Company's Thistle Manor will certainly go along, help alleviate seasonal overcrowding, if nothing else, because now you have, 19 more units that you're going to have, and those folks aren't going to be doubled up anywhere else. So it will help with seasonal overcrowding, but it certainly does not help with the year-round overcrowding that we already experience as folks don't migrate out of the area or have families and aren't migrating.
So one of the things I've learned about the H2A program, though, for those that do come up and participate, which there are some, is that some of those companies, if they can't get their own H2A housing because they're required to provide it as part of that contract, have bought some of the hotels and such in Salinas
Consolidated.
and evicted those people over there and put their people in there. So just trying to make sure that everybody understands there is an issue.
Oh, yeah.
And that usually goes through the code enforcement offices within each community, because they're the ones who come to housing and say what's happening here. Because it is a code enforcement issue, and but at the same time,
The growers are saying, hey, we have an obligation to provide the housing, so something's got to give.
and one of the interesting things about this is that, like Darby mentioned, that there are 3 agencies that you have to go through for the H2A housing, but if you go through the city, you don't have to.
You don't have to.
So that's why the cities get impacted and they rent up, because that's where the units are easy. So, for example, in Salinas, I've driven through neighborhoods in here where you see the vans, or the buses, coming in and out of neighborhoods. So they're displacing local residents from even single-family homes, not only hotels, but single-family homes now, because they can easily get in there.
Or apartment buildings.
But if they go to the Irving County trying to find H2A housing, then they have to go back. The state, the county, the state, they all have to approve,
Well,
they don't have to do that.
up until, and it may still exist, but they were trying to address it. The State Department of Employment Development is who checks whether or not you have housing units for the people you're gonna bring on a visa. But they never circled back with HCD to see if it had been properly licensed and permitted under the California Employer-Sponsored Housing Act. So EDD gets the thing that's from company X that says, yes, I have, here's the address. Great, bring your people in, and then HCD goes, wait, it's not permitted or inspected, or you have the problem that Anastasia's talking about in cities where these units silently convert and nobody ever knows.
May I comment on that?
Mhm.
In my street, there is this house that was, that had about, I count one time 20 people coming out of there.
Yeah.
So if these, business owners are trying to accommodate the people that they are bringing with a visa, and they're renting a house, I don't know how many bedrooms that house can have, but let's say it has 5 bedrooms, about for 20 people at least, because I have seen them many times. And the bus leave them, or they used to, because they move them, because they start causing us trouble there in the neighborhood. They can leave especially when they come from the fields with the shoes really muddy, they leave a track where they go to. So people start complaining, and they move from there. But my question is how the committees or whoever is responsible to be sure that these business owners do everything under code are inspecting these properties before they accept that they will bring people in, and how many?
That is part of the regulatory disconnect at the state level. It's a purely reactive system on our part. So if somebody does not come in and question the occupancy of a home or an apartment building or the use of a hotel, the regulatory agencies have no way of knowing that there is something possibly wrong.
So I take it no one checks like real estate transactions to see growers buying, repeating, that's not happening,
Renting,
doesn't happen.
I would love to say that we had the resources.
Okay, that's what I'm asking, that would be.
No, it really, no.
So,
Okay.
so it seems like,
before they cross the border, they just have to show we've got housing for them. We rented like this house, and I have room for 20, because they can put 4 per room.
No, they can't. It's
They
a
can't?
square footage basis.
No, it's.
Well,
The act is by square
As far as
foot.
I know, and because I have a big family, as far as I know,
Uh-huh.
it has to be no more than 2 persons per room. So if I have 6 in my family, I have to have at least 3-bedroom house.
I
That's
think
what I understand, because,
Those are you're going by health and safety code.
well, doesn't
California.
they have to respect that too?
There's actually a
It's
different
different.
code
Yeah.
for the Employer-Sponsored Housing Act.
The
And
rooms-
again, because this is not
permanent
something that
housing.
most folks look at on a regular basis, they don't know. So when somebody who is a responsible developer or employer comes in and says, I know about this regulation, I don't know what it requires, and they come to the plan encounter, somebody can help them or refer them to environmental health, who actually does the permitting in the unincorporated areas. But if they just go, I need the housing, I need the housing now, and I can get this house, they do it. That's what has happened. The Employer-Sponsored Housing Act does require 50 square feet per person. And then there's some other requirements in there. I don't have them all memorized because that's not what I work on regularly. But if you have specific things that you would like us to look into or bring back, we could certainly do that. But this was on the agenda and I wasn't here last time to know what specifically the questions or issues might be. So I took a shotgun approach to trying to go, here's kind of the universe, what are you interested in? And
I wasn't at the last meeting, so I wasn't able to
We
be
don't
part
have
of
the
the
minutes.
conversation, we don't have the minutes. But I'm just wondering, I guess, what are our options? Like, it sounds like, could we perhaps require, I guess I'm answering my own question here, I don't think it's possible, but, or maybe at least ask voluntarily for the municipalities to report to the county so that you had that information, or?
I'm already requesting that, I've already requested that information from the state, because the state does all the permitting for all the cities except for the county and Gonzales. So again, somebody who is operating totally above board transparently and it goes through the effort of getting their permits show up on the list. But, you know, if you're in a crunch and you need workers, they don't show up. I put together like 4 or 5 different lists, and from environmental health, HCD, Gonzales, some state reports, and EDD, and a large number of the facilities on the EDD list were not listed on any of the HCD or city or county reports, which tells me that they were never on anybody's radar for inspection.
I think last time, I'm trying to remember, I think you wanted just a detail of how many units there were, wasn't that? Does anyone remember why we? I thought it was just that you wanted a list of how many units were out there. Do we know how many units are out there?
Well, there's a difference between units and beds. So,
That was provided.
for example, Tanimur and Anil has 100 units, and a unit is counted as a front door. But each one of those units has 2 bedrooms with 4 people per bedroom. So their occupancy is actually 800. So there's the disconnect between units is great, but how many people are they putting in? And I only have bedroom counts for 2 projects right now, and those 2 projects have 1,400, I think it is.
And just to kind of put it in a different perspective, that I met with different employers that are trying to fill the need for the labor that they have, the labor need that they have every season. And it is like, they need people right now, they need them so fast, and they're just trying their best to get, people in, and they're trying to build the housing, but it's really hard too, because they have to go through all these permitting, and they have to, if they want to get something outside the county, then they have to go back and forth with the state, and they have to go back and forth with our different departments, and it's not easy, right? So they're doing the best they can, trying to get the labor in, so we get our vegetables, and we get our grapes, So anyway, just kind of that's the perspective too, that we have to consider, is that that's a big part of our industry, and we've got to provide the housing for the people who need the jobs, and we all depend on our economy to do well, so, yeah.
I just want to say that in the house I mentioned it before, they were renting it for $3,500.
Mhm.
When these people move out, obviously a farmer has no problem paying $3,500. But if I try to move into the same house, it's no way that I can pay $3,500. Obviously, they didn't lower the rent. So another family will move in, couldn't handle pay that much, and they move out.
I've heard as much as 16,000 for,
You pay $16,000?
no, I've heard
Oh, okay,
that-
per house?
per house.
Probably, but usually, my point is, on the other side, for people that have families, like probably you and me, it's making it difficult, because what I'm paying right now is too much, and I'm looking for a house to move that is low. It's no way. All the houses are overpriced, and then these people coming in and I understand we have to find middle ground for everybody, but I think that if I'm gonna respect the codes and the rules, then farmers should do the same thing too. So what is the reason that we are spending these afternoons here together? Are we gonna supervise that they do the right thing? Are we gonna just talking what is happening? We don't have power to make any comments or suggestions, so.
The
I'm a
H,
little lost, I'm sorry.
yeah, no, I mean, I think that's why we're trying to pull it back, like, why did we bring this up? I mean, this is it's an issue that now we're talking about, in this committee. I think, I will tell you at the federal level, I know that the ag companies are looking at the H2A program and they're trying to make changes to it. I know Panetta's office has been involved in the H2A program and I know right now Congress is looking at making changes, and I can't tell you exactly which bill it is that they're looking at, but you're exactly, bringing up the point that we've seen in Salinas, we see in South County mostly. I don't think we see it as much on the peninsula, but that we're seeing the impacts of the program and bringing ag workers temporarily, and then it leads into our other housing issues. That if we make it so hard to develop housing, for ag companies, if we put all these restrictions on to housing development, it's causing impact locally.
And the other population, because we already had enough workers, let's say that majority of them or some of them were not documented to work. That's why they are coming this program into place.
Yeah.
But then the other people that don't have documents that were working in those jobs stay here.
Mm-hmm.
So housing-wise, we still have a problem, or I would say a bigger problem now
Yeah.
than before the program started bringing people.
Yeah. So I would say let's take this into consideration as to, our overall housing crunch right now. And then we move on to the next agenda item,
I don't think this program's under our purview at this point anyway.
What is it?
I don't think the H2A program's under our purview at this point anyway.
No, it's not. Right.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to second item?
We could talk about it all day.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to, I guess my point is, I came to a few meetings before, and there was a miscommunication with the office about me still coming or not coming because I had to fill out another paperwork, and then finally when I questioned it, they say, oh no, you can still come. Okay, so that's what I'm here today. Obviously, I missed so many meetings that you guys have, and when I came at the beginning, it was not clear for me what's the purpose of this group, of this committee. What's the purpose? The name to me is advisory. Advisory what? Are we going to advise? Are we going to report? Are we not going to control? Are we going to request? It's still vague, and it might be myself not understanding exactly what's the purpose of this group.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that would be an ideal thing to add to a new board member package, which I've asked about. So I think that that's something we can work with Anita. And I've requested that myself, because last time we had a meeting, I became the chair, and I came to see her and when I turned in my paperwork and said, is there some kind of package for me? And I got the feeling that there was, I followed up and asked 2 weeks ago again if there was something I could come and pick up early so I could, get fresh information and just make sure I knew what was going on. So I agree that it would be good if you got a board package, and I think that the holdup for that is that we just don't have the admin here this evening. But we'll follow up with Anita and see if there's something she
That would be great, because she gave me a big binder that has nothing related to what the purpose of this.
So she gave you a package, you did get a board.
Yeah, but she gave me
Yeah, I got a
like tons of
binder,
minutes
too.
from
Okay.
months and years before. That doesn't really help me.
Okay,
at
so that's
this
on my
point.
mind too, and we'll check with Anita about that and see if we can get something that'll help clarify, but.
Can I try to respond to that based on the experience I've had over the years I've been here?
Sure, please.
So what I found is, we are an advisory group. We listen to different issues, and we put together a recommendation that goes to the Board of Supervisors for them to consider when they're voting on whatever issues it may be.
Okay.
And I've been here when we've had developers present where we made specific calls on specific things they were asking for. We said yes, no, passed along our advice. And
That's typically with whether if they've got a unit and they're renting it out, and they're not supposed to be, those kinds of things.
right, so a couple of those specific things have come up just in the time. I've just been on with this group for a year, so that's what I've seen come through too. So, But we'll follow up with Anita, it's really the best thing we can do, and see if there's some kind of,
Yeah, because I recall in my first meeting that there was this lawyer there trying to have some influence in this group, and we asked for some information, and we come back to the next meeting, and he's still talking about the same thing, and to me, it was wasting my time, honestly. Because
right, and that was the one where Karen,
ignoring
Yeah.
all the information we requested, there were many people asking the same thing. He comes back and goes back to the same thing.
and so the recommendation we made was not to allow them to make the change, because I was present for that one too.
Okay.
So yes, that's a good example of one of the things that we do that's very specific, where we hear him out, we ask for information, he doesn't show up with it, we recommend not wasting any more time on it, would be a good way to put it, so yeah,
Because he was making money, we were here as volunteers.
right. It was-
I'm
That
pretty
was
sure
an
he was
interesting
getting paid
meeting,
for it. He
that was my
getting
first
paid.
one, so.
And I'll just say too, you know, I became the manager a year ago, a little
Yeah.
over a year ago. So, you know, I was like, okay, what is this group about? Same question, you know, and I think housing is, you know, we want to make sure we continue the dialogue that we have. We make the meetings purposeful. I've talked to Merg about that, you know, and that you have a point, but I will say housing is really changes based on the need of, you know, this meeting and the agendas change based on what's really happening in the, you know, community, what projects we might have going on. Some of it's cyclical, some of it is totally, you know, can change just based on what's happening, so situational.
I understand,
Yeah.
I've been working with housing since 1994, so I've been involved in
Good.
housing issues, so I understand that part, but I think it will be very important for us, or at least for me, to exactly know what our role is here and what can we ask and what can we.
Okay,
And I think
we
the,
will, yes.
and I
okay.
think the role has changed quite a bit from year to year.
Right. And what Karen and I discussed at last month's, at the last meeting, was that we want to also, because I asked these questions too, in what way is our recommendation presented? Should we be there when it happens? Would that be a good supportive thing for us to do? How do we get people that are in our districts to tell us about anything they'd like us to convey into the meeting and perhaps beyond? So all those things are possible as far as I know, but with Karen and Anita out, this is just not the best meeting ever to try to get it covered. But those are legitimate questions, and I think we all have them. Fair enough to say?
Sounds good to me.
Okay?
Yep.
All right, so should we move on to the next thing and let them keep the ball rolling here? All right.
All right, inclusionary housing update. So we started this process in August 2018. Last year, we received a memorandum regarding the inclusionary housing ordinance conformance with state law and recent case law. And we also had the inclusionary housing ordinance financial evaluation. Those documents were presented to the board in February last year. The financial evaluation caused some heartburn, I think, for a lot of folks.
Financial evaluation of what?
Of the inclusionary housing ordinance. So in order for the county to have the ordinance, we have to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the state that it is not an impediment to housing development. So you have to,
A fee?
A fee. yeah, either the fee or the unit, okay? And depending on where you are in this county and the value of land, in some places it is, I think the fee in Big Sur was like $1.2 million. It made some people's heads spin, you know, and then you go down to South County and it's only $30,000. It's kind of silly. But if you would like, I can talk to you about that and share that with you offline. But based on the feedback that we got from the board, we did hold a meeting with housing developers, and Linda was there and very vocal. And then we stepped back, and we need to get back to this and go to the Board of Supervisors for policy direction. There are 4 primary issues that we need guidance on. Unfortunately, I realize the attachment is not here, but the biggest one is really what is the board's hope and goal for the inclusionary housing program? Is it to create small pockets of scattered owner-occupied housing that's affordable to moderate income households? Or is it to create a locally controlled pool of funding that maybe can be used to leverage state grants or other funding programs, or to possibly expand the affordability beyond what is typically allowed through the existing programs, which typically don't allow you to invest in housing and subsidize housing for populations above about 80% of the area median income. So that's one big policy issue. I wish I could remember the rest of the other three off the top of my head, but I can't.
So there would normally be an addendum to this with some details.
There was supposed to be, there's a reference to the attachment, but it got missed for some reason. The other issue we're trying to balance is,
Is it this document?
no. The other issue that we're balancing is, in 2010, when the Board of Supervisors adopted the general plan, there were a number of land use policies that were included that require affordable housing requirements, but the conditions were, the requirements were poorly defined, let's say that. And so workforce to housing appears out of nowhere in one of these land use policies. And we need direction from the board on what they want to do with it. And so particularly with regard to the workforce to housing affordability level, it's challenging. Other issues would be where it's located, how it's cited. But with the workforce to, which the attachment was included, there have been only 2 projects in the county that were conditioned with workforce 2, and they were conditioned within 6 months of each other, and they were conditioned before the 2010 general plan. And what's really hard as staff is looking at them and going, one of them allowed you to earn up to 250% of AMI, and one of them allowed up to 150, and they used the same workforce 2 classification. One had a perpetual resale restriction and an equity share. The other one only required a 1-year resale and then you were free.
That's East Garrison.
That's East Garrison, which creates a lot of work for staff as we prepare all these documents only to release them a year later. We need direction on that. From the supervisors. The other thing that's hard to understand from the staff perspective, and this is where the table and the salaries that I put in here come into play. There's a lot of talk about wanting workforce housing, and when people talk about workforce housing, they're usually referencing teachers, firemen, policemen, folks like that. And so I pulled some salaries off of online salary schedules for various agencies and positions, and then dump them into, so we can compare them where they are with the affordability levels of the inclusionary housing program. And what we find is that, you know, a lot of these positions, even at the very bottom entry level, you're already pushing the top end of workforce 1, or you're flat out over income. And then, because we have to look at the household composition, so if 2 people are going to be there, whether they're married or not, if they're both going to appear on the mortgage, we have to look at both of their incomes. And all of a sudden, if you start to look at it and go, most people are not going to want to go, I have a PhD and I'm going to go look for a high school dropout to be my roommate. Going with the idea that there's some parity, I just said we're going to say that they make within, the second person is within 75% of the income. And that really pushes folks over in those types of occupations over the top. And so part of the policy question is we have a very finite amount of money that we could direct to affordable housing. What is the best possible way to target it, and what do we want to do with it?
Because currently people in these occupations at these pay rates don't qualify.
Right.
So just a quick little.
Is that the same as don't need it? Because I'm not sure
No,
what it is.
that's a whole different question. That's a
Well,
whole different issue.
this is how it plays into East Garrison.
Okay,
So in East Garrison, the market level, actually the market rate housing is selling under the formula for the inclusionary workforce housing, okay? So the market can create this imbalance, and that's why your inclusionary ordinance needs to have some flexibility and take into market conditions. So at this time, the market is actually lower than the level of inclusionary. So rather than having, you know, this affordability level at the workforce 1 and 2, we can set the policy to go to a deeper affordability and help more low to moderate income families, which is getting back to H2A issue a little bit. That,
Hospitality industry as well.
yeah, we need more affordable housing. We need deeper affordability. We don't need to have a program that's ineffective, that we're actually, the reason there's a 1-year restriction is that they're having to actually give people incentives to buy those workforce units because they had to do them because of our inclusionary ordinance at this time. Well, rather than have an inclusionary ordinance that's ineffective, we need to get, my recommendation is that we go to deeper affordability. And we start, and when you look at the RENA numbers, that's where we're not meeting our RENA, is in our lower income categories. We're fine in the workforce 1 and 2. I agree with you, Lee, that, you know, we still have people at these income levels, workforce 1 and 2, that cannot afford to buy, but maybe they're even buy renting. How do we incentivize those individuals to get a down payment?
well, that's the other thing I think is a part of, because in my own situation, I'm sure many of us have experienced that even if everything else were okay, I have no shot at saving for a down payment when I'm paying rent that's over 50% of my income, which I personally do. So even if I have perfect credit and I've been a homeowner before and I know what I'm doing and I see something I love and I can make everything else work. The other thing is, of course, closing costs, which can be, I don't know what they are in California because I'm not a realtor here, but I was once in Pennsylvania, and those can sometimes be a very big chunk to come up with as well. So yeah, I think everything else can be all right, and you still can be a renter who's never going to afford a down payment, and that becomes a barrier, even if you have a great job. So
That's on my family situation. We tried to get a house there at Harrison, and they asked me for the closing costs and this and that,
Right.
and we don't have the money. Because we are paying so much in rent,
Right.
there is no way to save money.
yes, I
And
think
I
that's a real
think-
issue for most people. is that-
Exactly, and a lot of people in that situation, so we don't qualify. We qualify because we are in that bracket of income, but we don't qualify because we don't have a savings to
Right.
pay the closing.
Well, again, this
costs
seems to
and
be
the down
something
payment that
we're
we are
all quite
requesting.
aware of, is that is an issue.
And this is where our policy comes into play. So this is where the inclusionary ordinance update comes in. You know, we want to probably, you know, recommend to the board that we go for a deeper affordability and make our inclusionary policy work for us.
Mhm.
And then we look at other programs like, you know, down payment assistance
Right.
program to help the workforce 1 and 2, because that's where they need the help.
Yeah.
They don't need, you know, we need deeper affordability in the inclusionary and then a down payment assistance program.
I think
So-
also part of the problem though is, with as many regulations as there are on trying to get permits to build,
Yeah,
you could do all that stuff, but you still don't have units that you can have to sell.
and that's where we also want to look at the inclusionary as a balance of not disincentivizing developers into building housing that's affordable. So,
Or just being able to build housing.
right,
I take it to the other extreme. Trying to get a permit around here is,
Right, we could do
Very
that all
tough.
night too, let's not,
Yeah.
yeah.
so, but that's what I'm saying, though,
Yeah.
it's a two-sided
Sure,
thing.
absolutely.
You gotta look at both.
So one of the other things that I just wanted to let Virginia know too, and anybody else from last time, was one of the other things that Karen and I would like to know is again, if we're gonna talk about these things and we agree that we talk about it more and we decide these are recommendations and we'd like to back you up in that way, then what does that look like and how do we specifically do that?
I think when we start going to the board on the inclusionary housing ordinance update, this is where we can bring in the HAC's recommendation.
Okay.
And the HAC can say, you know, we looked at deeper affordability or the issues that we're seeing.
Okay.
Definitely.
Good.
And then we can come up with, maybe the chair and the co-chair come up with a formal letter, and that can go into inclusionary, you know, the public participation.
Because I think in the run-up to that, that would also be the ideal time for us to do what we can. I mean, you have your own story, I have mine, but to also invite other people, tell them that we're involved in this and that having their stories do matter, and if they'll help, then we could get some. Have people write letters that we can use to kind of throw into the mix about their situation. So
Yeah.
that's another thing we could do to go along with our own recommendations, and that would be on us to decide that we want to reach out to our communities and find out what some of these stories are we should pass along. So, okay, it's another way to make this a worthwhile thing to be involved in, I think.
And if you can make it to the board, you know, in
Yeah.
those meetings.
Yes, and
give
again,
the
I'd like to,
in-person testimony.
if we know when these things are presented and can be there, that I think that would be another way to make this
Mhm.
worthy, as
Yeah.
it already is.
On the next meeting, would you want to have maybe just about, you know, dedicate like 20 minutes to really maybe defining, you know, a new path forward for or goals maybe for the year?
I think that would be great.
As a chair?
Because maybe by then we'll get the minutes from last time, we'll get the attachment, we can all have time to read and absorb this,
Mhm.
reach out to our communities a little bit, and then maybe shoot for doing that productive work at the next time around. Okay? Good. That sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, can we move on to our third item? Anything else on this for now? Anybody? Okay.
I like the idea of looking for more hospitality-oriented affordable housing. So, yeah.
Yeah, good to bring that up. I think that's to be noted.
And shout out to Post Ranch, I know has been big in it. They've done, I think they have 11 units down there, at least. Housing pipeline, I'm not sure again what the intent was, but over the last 5 years, the housing office has periodically maintained a housing pipeline where we've gone out and surveyed the cities and the nonprofit housing developers about what they have in the pipeline, trying to find out what's been approved, what hasn't been. Based on that, we have identified about almost 13,000 units that are in the pipeline at some point. The bad news is more than 3/4 of those, the developers have no planned start date. So, you know, they may as well not exist. What's even worse is, excuse me, I editorialized there. There was a project, Farini Ranch, which is located on Highway 68 and San Venancio, or is it, it's Corral, that was approved for 185 units. And that was going to include 17 deed-restricted moderate income units. State money was used to purchase the development rights after it had been approved by the Board of Supervisors for less than market value. So whatever else you think, the state has some interesting priorities going on when they're using state money to encourage affordable housing, but also buying up development rights for affordable housing. The other one is there's a 1,700 unit development that was supposed to go on in Gonzales that the DeRigos pulled out. It's just not going to happen. So right there, you're looking at almost 15% of the units in the pipeline. The other thing that is troubling is of the 14 units projects in the unincorporated area where I was actually able to pin down the approval date for the entitlements. so that they can move forward. And this represents almost 3,100 units. Their entitlements were all granted back in, on average, February 2009. 11 years where they've already done the legwork and can start building vertically. They just aren't. East Garrison had 1,400 units. It was approved in October 2006. It was 2010-11 before we saw the first units. And that through the end of last year, they had only built 923.
Do we know what is holding up all of these?
Because I think we knew before what the holdup was, which was a big recession and but what do we think it is now? Any feel for that?
No.
Okay,
Can I speak?
Yeah.
of course.
So a lot of, okay, so I'm representing the Thistle Manor project, which is my company's project. So this is in Castroville. When they approved the Castroville, what do they call it, Castroville area plan or whatever it was, they had included traffic impact fees for two projects which ultimately were not going to get built, to the tune of $19,000 a unit.
No.
Traffic fees?
There are 3 different traffic fees in Castroville. The Castroville Community Plan, the TAMC impact fee, and the Public Works North County Transportation impact fee, and all in, they're around $25,000 per unit.
Okay, sorry. So
That's how well I know them.
Wow.
one of them
All right.
was what was considered the Artichoke bypass, which was going to come in on the north side of Castroville. Well, the Coastal Commission found out about that and said, there's no way you're ever going to build that.
Is that Castroville Oaks?
No, it was Artichoke Avenue.
Artichoke Avenue.
Was it a different one?
Yeah, it was gonna go under the bridge
Under the bridge.
at the slough and
Right.
parallel the slough down to, I think, Preston.
Right. So that was one. And then the other one was
The interchange of,
the interchange
Chesterfield
of Black
Boulevard
Road
at
and
156.
156, which is supposed to be built now by the Measure B funds.
Yeah.
So technically, I would think that you would take the traffic impact fee study that they used, subtract those, and redivide, and boom, there's your new traffic impact fee. That's too simple. The county wanted us to pay to have a new study done to reevaluate what our traffic impact fee should be, and it was a lot harder than just doing what I was explaining. And so we argued with that for
30 years.
years,
3.
before we ended up changing, and this was for apartments originally, we wanted to build apartments. So then we changed it over to this H2A program, because those people are bussed everywhere by the growers. The people aren't allowed to bring their own cars.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so, well, there's traffic. So then after a bunch of arguing, with the fallout was, okay, we'll redo our traffic study, have the traffic engineer figure out what an appropriate fee would be and modify it. And so now they've generally agreed to how much that's supposed to be, but we're having to get this H2A contract signed so we can get it recorded. And then hopefully this summer we'll actually proceed with the project. But we could have started, how long ago?
You had
So it was
4 or
almost
5 years ago?
Years ago.
And built some apartments, but because of the fees they wanted to charge us, it just didn't make any sense.
And the cost of doing your own study, it sounds like. Okay,
Yeah,
Yeah,
the study
because,
is,
it's like,
there's a real life example of what.
but the big one is Butterfly Village, which actually survived a referendum. And it's supposed to go in on,
Where is that?
it's at the north end of Salinas,
Okay.
in the unincorporated areas, but, and again, now it was approved in I believe it was 2009, and it just died, and I've never heard anything about it since.
Was that a local developer, do you know? Or was it?
that one I'm not sure about.
Okay.
Now, we were trying to do some more H2A housing on Harrison Road in Salinas. And they were gonna go on the property of the farm labor contractor. But because of the county's requirements of the nitrate level that you can put into the ground, we couldn't get the project to work, even if we put in our own sewage treatment plant. Didn't work. So at some point, somebody came up with the idea, hey, we're about 3 miles from Salinas. Let's put a sewer line in from the project to Salinas, from the county to the city, tying to the city sewer lines, and, you know, you got your sewer. Cool. Everybody, I got a number for that, everybody was happy. We put a force main in. City got into it when push came to shove, and they were like, oh, well, we really like you guys to put a 12-inch gravity main sewer from Russell Road out to Sala Road. $1 million more. Well, I'm sorry, my client didn't have the extra $1 million in his rear.
Couple of $1 million hurdles in your way, right?
Yeah, to
Okay.
sit there and put out. So that project's sitting and waiting, you know, to see if this other project, which is on this corner of Sala, commercial development, is gonna happen, because if they're gonna happen, then we'll be able to piggyback onto
Sewer
that.
projects, yeah. Wow, okay.
So, there you go.
Good
Two
example.
examples.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. So that's our pipeline report. And on the back here, this is
That's
the
just,
breakdown of what you found?
yeah, just by jurisdiction and year when it's expected to come online. If, or break ground if it actually does. It's frustrating.
Yes, sounds like it's frustrating.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
because I know of other H2A projects and so on that have wanted to go with growers with money. Just, you know, tell me a number and I'll write the check. But because of the sewer or the this or the
Coastal
that,
Commission or whatever.
they don't have.
Another issue right now too is NIMBYism,
Right.
and that's something that, you know, we can impact locally in our communities, so if a housing development is going in, you know, is that a comment there? You're right. I know.
Yeah.
So if a project is going in locally, you know, trying to bring in some local support, I know that there are some issues with that in South County and all of our,
Well, I think there's always an issue with that. When I first was approached about doing this, one of the first things I did was send an article to Mary Adams' office about, I think it's Santa Barbara County had a sort of a no NIMBY thing where one person standing up at a meeting can no longer stop the circus. You just can't do it that way anymore. And I've also read, this is an excellent point, it makes a lot of sense, that the people, this whole keep showing up at the meetings thing, frankly, bugs me because people are working 2 jobs and they're busy people. And also, the people that will be helped by these projects, we don't know who they are, and they don't know who they are. So they're not going to come to the meeting. The people that are available to come to the meetings are the people who say no. Or they bring up, you know, repeated, I'm a good person, but I don't want it, not in my backyard, whatever. Even if they came, and then you get to hear the pulled up by their own bootstrap stories all the time. So that's part of the problem too, is that we have this idea that representation means everybody affected can show up, and in this case, it's just not true. So that's, I think, another problem with this overall. So you really do have to advocate, and because that crowd just, you can't just call them up and say, I need everybody to show up, because we don't know who they are.
They don't even know who they are.
but also.
And if you show up and you're the developer, well, you're the developer, therefore you're discounted.
I think a lot of it is, you know, local politics showing up to making sure your city council knows, like, this is a project, you know, getting local support, but.
I think that's a good thing, of course. Because hopefully they are connected to
Hasn't
the
helped
people
me.
who will eventually
Yeah.
I got
benefit.
supervisors behind it, I got the mayor behind me, on the Harrison Road one.
Yeah,
It's just not budging.
No. Still not helping.
All right. So,
Glasses.
but we'll keep working on it.
3 more years.
it's good you're here where your points, you know, matter.
There's a reason why I'm opinionated.
Well, there's a
I
reason
get
why we're all
frustrated.
That's good to hear
Okay.
it, that's why we're here.
Has anybody got any questions about any of these addendum or anything? Okay. All right, I guess we can keep moving on to our next item, which is receiving an update on the No Place Like Home projects.
Okay, so, hey, these are baby projects we're working on here. I think, you know, the 4 that we submitted, we're still waiting on the state to see if they will be funded. The Light Fighter Village project, which is the 71 units in Marina, the state has given us notification that that project meets all the No Place Like Home guidelines and requirements. So that's a good sign. I'm waiting to hear on the other 3 developments. And we're waiting, and then we'll find out if those projects will be funded by the No Place Like Home program. And then they can start rolling forward into tax credits, and they have a long way to go. The only one that doesn't is the interim project that if they are funded, that project will start, and that's in Salinas. It would be 8 units of permanent supportive housing and 7 units of transitional. So cross your fingers.
Good news. So there's a hurdle hopped,
Yeah,
I'd say. Oh, that's good to know.
yeah, and
And so
just,
this is the Marina project that's with the, I'm thinking, is this the one with the veterans, part of the Veterans Transition Center? Is that what I'm thinking? Great, that's good to know. It definitely counts as good news. All right, and I see details about all of those on the addendums.
yeah, those addendums show just, the applicants self-score their projects based on the state criteria, and they show the self-scoring here, so
Okay.
you don't really get to see, we haven't seen yet how the state will actually score it in reality. The developers are pretty good though, but I have seen it fluctuate, those point numbers fluctuate, but that means everybody else's could fluctuate as well. And so, just there were $52 million for $52,445,511 in competitive funds available to medium-sized counties, and the total competitive funds requested was 49 million. Or I think that's backwards. I think it should be the other way around. So, with the COSER, this is the operating reserve fund. That increases the amount to 64 million. So it is over the funding available by about 15 million. But that's not too bad. If we score high enough, we might be able to slip in with our projects. 15 million could be like, a few projects. And it shows in the details like how much each community asked, or how much each project asked for. So I'm hopeful that maybe we could get at least 2 or 3 funding in this round. We can also go for the next round. There'll be 2 more rounds of No Place Like Home. And in total, if all of those developments were funded, we would have about 320.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the details on each of those are on page 2 and 3 of the attached information. Yay, good news. Anything else about that? Any questions? All right, we'll keep moving on then to item 5, receive an update on Urban County 2020 to 2024 Consolidated Plan and 2020 to 2021 Annual Action Plan.
Great. Okay, so on this one, we are moving forward with our con plan and our action plan. So this is our HUD funding that we receive annually for community development, really. So where we're talking about what Mo was bringing up with infrastructure issues. CDBG is not, you can't use it for new housing construction, but it can be used for infrastructure or items related to housing like that. So the county receives about 1.38 million roughly every year. That fluctuates based on Congress's appropriations, but Congress tries to keep that funding steady. It is a bipartisan supported program, which is great. And so we are just working with the supervisors right now and the Urban County Standing Committee to allocate this year's funding. The other, we also work with the different communities and what their needs are for the funding, because we have these consortium cities. So that is where we're at with, we talked about last time that we have the 5-year planning horizon going on. And I have, a couple of the supervisors have talked about infrastructure, whether it's sidewalks or sewer, which can be directly related to, a community. CDBG funds need to be used in a local area where there's at least, 51% of the use of the area is housing, and they have to be low mod. So those are kind of the main objectives of the program, and where we're programming some of the funding. So the 5-year horizon of funding throughout the county, if you guys have any ideas of community development type projects that you have been thinking about, go ahead and let me know. Even if you want to talk about them here for a few minutes, that's fine. We talked about a few last time, which was fun.
You can put a sewer line for my project.
Yeah, $1 million, right?
There it is.
That's the premium. It costs more than that, but that's the premium.
Are you housing all low mod income?
Well, the farm worker, the,
Farm
It's all
worker housing.
H2A.
Yeah, all H2A. You'd have to prove it.
no, we can, actually, because they're migrant, seasoned migrant, they're unassuming low mod.
Mhm.
So it says here that the action plan and consolidated plan will be considered by the Board of Supervisors on May 12th.
Yep.
How about fast?
Too fast.
Too fast.
Anything, any other types of community development activities in South County that you can think of? For the next 5 years? Anybody else?
Okay, it looks like we have worked our way through all of our new business. Did anybody want to make a committee member report related to HAC goals and housing advocacy matters?
Sure. So Pamela Weston was gonna come, I think, but she didn't. She is facilitating a group called the Stakeholders Advisory Committee. More or less, anyone in the community, I guess, stakeholders are typically just only the government entities or the funding recipients, but not necessarily customer base. So I know that she wanted to talk a lot about affordable housing, but I can't remember exactly what she wanted, but just to make it aware that there is a group trying to make inroads with the county.
And what's Pamela's group?
It's called the Stakeholders Advisory Committee.
Stakeholders Advisory.
And I spoke to Pamela this week,
Oh, good.
and this may be something that, traditionally this group hasn't talked about, homeless housing and homeless issues, and that may be something that is a goal to discuss a bit about that.
Yeah.
I'm saying traditionally, right? So we can move forward this year. I think setting 1-year goals would be, really helpful. But I know that Pam serves on this advisory committee. She stays really up to date on, homeless issues and how do we get the homeless community need and voice heard in our planning efforts. And so I think that is her main goal. If she were to, come to the committee and talk to us, would be how can we help the homeless issues within the community? So
It looks like just from the schedule of meetings that even if we had her at the next one, we'd be missing the goal of this consolidated, all of that. It isn't something we could include that quickly.
it's up to, yeah, it's up to
Because it sounds like they're meeting, we're meeting and then they're meeting. Did I say that? Yeah. Well, it looks like our upcoming meeting is May 13th, 2020, and we just said that they would be considering that plan. I believe I said
The day
May
before.
12th, the day before.
Oh, that's the consolidated?
Right, is that, so it
Totally
wouldn't have anything to do with that?
No.
All right, so maybe we could get her at the next meeting, May 13th, then.
We'll try.
Good job. Can't have to job.
Yeah, and I let her know about this meeting, she was doing this. And some of the homeless issues are related to social services and health department and behavioral health. And it all kind of converges, housing and health and social services. They're all related to keeping people housed and finding housing opportunities, whether it's rental housing or trying to find, most of it is rental permanent supportive units for chronically homeless, but a lot of people are becoming homeless just because they can't afford the rent anymore. And, how do we address that? So
I'm ready to go homeless. I'm paying so much rent, I cannot catch up with all the bills at once.
right.
It is crazy, and they gave me another notice that they're gonna raise the rent on me, and I'm like trying to look for another house around Salinas, and they're higher.
Well, make sure that when that happens, that you're, because we do have rent increase law that's been passed, so you need, and there are landlords who are acting like they don't know anything about it, because I'm hearing about this from other people. So it can only be so much now that they can raise your rent, and you can't be evicted without cause. So those are two new things that I think people need to know more about.
They can't increase your rent by more than 5%.
Right, plus
Like
CPI.
how much?
5%.
5%.
5%.
Yeah,
It's
I
Yeah,
think
plus
they need
CPI.
more than 5%.
What was that, Wes? I'm sorry.
sorry,
It's 8%. It's 5% plus the CPI in this area. The state determined that was 8% is the maximum annual increase for right now.
So 8%, your rent can't go up more than 8%, and the, if I were
Start-
you,
Yeah, start
go
with
ahead,
when?
start with that.
Yeah.
January 1st,
yeah.
2020. And
Yeah.
actually, there was something in it, that was a screwy law, because there was something retroactive to the stop
I think
renting.
It was the just cause eviction.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right, that was about the
No.
just cause evictions, I
No,
think.
you can't.
But yeah, those are both things that you should, again, I have another friend who's going through that same exact thing, and the landlord is acting, and it's possible that this lady actually doesn't know that she's not allowed to do what she's doing, so it might be worth it to, I don't know the
Yeah.
SB number of that,
I don't
it
remember
was.
that.
But anyway, it just happened, and it might help
Yes.
you out, okay?
and if you need an advocate, the county does fund a fair housing counseling service that will work with you to address this with your landlord if it was an excessive increase.
Who should come?
Our office funds it out of the community development block grants. So if you call me tomorrow, I will give you Echo's number because I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
You said Echo Strippers?
Echo.
Okay,
Should be on our website too.
I will look that up for my friend as well, thank you.
Yeah, because we put
Good
it,
to know.
up there in a little flyer about it.
So it's on the
If you still
website.
have a flyer, can you forward it to me? You have my email address?
Yeah.
I'd like it too, if you're doing that anyway, Darren.
Mhm.
Or I can wait and do it in the meeting. Or I'll look it up on the site. Okay,
Mhm.
anything else to add, Wes? Was that what you wanted to add?
Well, and toward any kind of housing, even at the most basic level, the Coalition of Homeless Service Providers has a position on how encampments could look, with dumpsters and porta potties and shower and laundry access, but more or less just trying to make a more apartment style feel to a place, just tent and stuff in the ground, not a blanket of trash, there's a dumpster area, there's a trash area, restroom area, or
So they're developing a plan for what area?
well, no, they have a position paper on how
Position
they
paper.
like to see encampments look, and it's affordable housing related is, how I guess I'm phrasing this. But there is entity and workforce in action. I even hear the health department may actually set those up, and or at least hand washing stations or something, because of the virus.
Okay.
But much more needs to be addressed. So just wanted to make you aware of it at least.
Maybe we could share that position paper next time, if you want to.
Sure.
Can't hurt.
Just information.
Happy to see that. Okay, anything else, anyone? We can, a motion to adjourn? Need a motion to do that? Or just
Updates
adjourn?
from staff.
I
Nothing?
make a motion to.
All right,
Okay.
then we are adjourned.
There was no updates from staff.
Shit.
Other than this?
New business.
Yeah, we
Just
don't have-
the next agenda, we can do the first 20 minutes, like setting kind of our one-year goals.
Okay.
And then, what else did we, just so we can get a good agenda for the next round?
I'd like to maybe talk to Anita between now and then about a board package.
Okay?
There is not one, then let's develop one.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'd like to discuss some ways that we can both reach out to people in our communities and get what we need from them, and then, also follow our own recommendation into the SOUP meetings, those of us that can do that, and be involved in both involving our community members and presenting their case as well. I think that would be, as recommended, in conjunction with staff. Okay, that sound good?
Anybody else have anything else on the agenda? for the agenda next time?
Makes sense, okay.
I won't be here.
Why not?
My wife's birthday, we're leaving
Oh.
town. I think
Exciting.
she takes precedence, I believe.
Oh, well,
I guess so.
I mean, you don't wanna volunteer on wife's birthday?
well, thanks, everyone, that was lively and interesting, lots of good information, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anita will
Thank
be
you
back
for
with us
coming.
soon.